And where's the share the sheet? Share.
Let's see.
Okay, and zoom in.
Now you can't. Okay.
All right, is that enough?
A little bigger, I
A
think.
little bigger, okay.
That's good.
All right. So I'm still debating exactly which source to start with here. Because there's one important source that doesn't quite fit with the flow, but it's an important one to know. But let's start over here. So let's take a step back. We're in Parshat Shlach. Shlach, of course, is the parsha of the spies, of the Meraglim. And it's the turning point and a critical point in Sefer Bamidbar, because it's with the people's accepting the negative report of the spies that we then are punished to have to spend 40 years in the desert. So that entire generation will die out and not be able to enter into the land. So it's a very important piece in the narrative, not of the Jewish people. We think about the 40 years in the desert. There's some interesting discussion among various commentators as to, obviously it was a punishment, but there's a school that sees the 40 years as a positive thing, that we needed those 40 years to develop and learn and to get in the right whatever spiritual frame of mind we needed to be in, and perhaps physical frame of mind as well, to enter the land. But nonetheless, it came about from this negative result. And of course, we know that while the majority of the spies of the Meraglim gave a negative report, there were two that stand out for giving the positive report. And that, of course, is Yehoshua and Kalev. But I wanted to tonight look at what the Torah tells us about Yehoshua and Kalev, because it's really interesting, and these are thoughts that are still formulating. Nothing is set or concrete, but there's some really interesting things to observe in the Torah's description. So I think we'll start with source number 3, and we'll have to come back to number 1 and 2. So in source number 3, we hear that the spies come back from their mission. They come back from scouting out the land. And I should just also mention that there's, of course, a whole discussion among the commentators also about what exactly the sin was and how things went so badly. The most common explanation is that they were supposed to report the facts, and they provided their opinions or their assessment of the situation. For them to say that the people, they saw giants in the land is one thing. For them to say they saw giants in the land and those giants are going to squish us and we felt like grasshoppers, so that's taking it to another level. That was never their assignment. And then there's also discussion as to why they give their report back in public in front of the whole nation. It doesn't seem like a good strategic move. If you're going to get a report, you'd want to first give it to the hires up and let them decide if this is fit for public consumption or not. On the other hand, we certainly value transparency and openness, but this seems to be a little bit too open and too transparent. But nonetheless, here we are. They come back. Vayelchu vayavohu el Moshe. I'll just put it down in the English in the next page. And if I have to scroll down, someone will let me know when that time is. So they come back and they go to Moshe and Aaron and the entire nation, and they show them the giant, massive fruit that they gathered. They say, we saw the land that you sent us to. It's flowing with milk and honey. This is its fruit. Efes ki az ha'am hayoshev ba'aretz ba'arim ba'tzurot gedolot me'od v'gam yilidei ha'anak ra'inu sham, but it's all for naught, because the nation that lives there is very strong, and the cities are fortified, and we saw children of giants. Amalek yoshev be'eretz hanegev, v'achiti v'yebusi v'amri yoshev b'har, v'aknani yoshev al hayam, v'al yad hayarden. And there's all these other nations that are living there. Vayahas Kalev et ha'am el Moshe, vayomer alona alev yarashnu ota ki yachol nuchala. Kalev silenced them to Moshe, and he said, "We will surely go up and conquer it because we are able to. We are capable of it." But everyone else who was with him said, "We can't go up and conquer it because the people living there is stronger than us." ויוציאו דיבת הארץ ואשר תרו אותה אל בני ישראל לאמור הארץ אשר עברנו בה לעתור אותה ארץ אוכלת יושביה היא. And they spoke badly about the land to the Jewish people, and they said the land which we went to is a land that devours its inhabitants. And everyone who we saw there was of significant size, I guess we'll translate that as. And we saw the giants, and we felt like we were like grasshoppers in their eyes. We felt like grasshoppers. They saw us as grasshoppers. And the entire nation cries out on that night. The Medrash, of course, says Balayla Hahu is the night of Tisha B'Av, and that this was the first of many, 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 many calamities to befall the Jewish people on Tisha B'Av. Vayilonu al Moshe v'al Aharon v'al kol bnei Yisrael vayomer alehem kol eda lumatnu be'eretz Mitzrayim o b'midbar hazeh lumatnu. So they complained to Moshe and Aaron, and they said, if only we had died in Egypt or in the desert. Lama Hashem eviu otanu al eretz hazot linkol b'cherev nashenu v'tzapenu yulavaz halo tov lanu shuv Mitzrayima. Why did God bring us so that just to meet this horrible fate that's going to befall us when we enter the land? Our wives and children will be crushed. Better we should return to Egypt. So they all said, let's go back to Egypt. Moshe and Aaron fall on their faces before the entire nation of Israel. Yehoshua bin Nun v'Kalev ben Yefuna min hatarim et haaretz karu bigdehem. Yehoshua bin Nun and Kalev ben Yefuna, who were among those who spied the land, tore their clothing. Vayomu el kol hadat bnei Israel le'imor haaretz asher avanu ba la'tor ota tova haaretz me'od me'od. He said to the entire nation, the land which we went to scout is very, very good. Im chafetz banu Hashem ve'evi otanu el haaretz hazot u'netana lanu eretz asher hi zavat chalav u'devash. If God is favorable to us and brings us to this land, then we will conquer it. Ach b'Hashem al timrodu v'atem al tiru et ha'am haaretz ki lachmenu hem. Just don't rebel against God, and then you have no reason to fear the people that live there. Sar tila me'alehem Hashem itanu al tiraum. Their I'll translate as their aura will disappear from them, and Hashem will be with us. Do not fear them. Vayomu kol edal yirgomotam ba'avanim uchvod Hashem nirah ba'ol moed el kol b'nei Israel. And the nation wants to stone Joshua and Kalev, and God's glory appeared in the tent of the meeting.
Can you move it down a little?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's our first source. So it's very disturbing and difficult to read. That this difficult report that they were given. On the one hand, on the other hand, we just have to put the question out there. We have to put it out there. Well, if that's their honest assessment, what were they supposed to say? Right? So, yeah, maybe they shouldn't have given their report or their opinion in front of the entire nation. But if that's what they truly thought, then what are they supposed to do? Stay silent?
If it's a country that eats its inhabitants, how come there are so many giants?
Right.
If the people in the country are big, it's because the country gave them the nutrients and the opportunity to be big.
Right.
And it doesn't mean they can't be conquered.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. That's one thing that has to be put out there. But what really struck me, and not just, I mean, many are struck by this, is in verse 30, over here, the first time we see any resistance to the negative report is who speaks?
Caleb.
Kalev. Who doesn't speak?
Yehoshua.
Yeah, what happened to Yehoshua? Right? Why? It's very odd that Kalev is the only one who refutes the report originally. When does Yehoshua get involved?
Versus later, let's see.
Yeah, so we saw it right in verse 6, the next bolded
Yeah,
piece,
right there close.
right? And he doesn't really speak up, but he tears his clothing. He makes a dramatic
Sure.
gesture, and then he speaks and he says, "No, if we remain faithful to God, then we'll be okay. We'll be able to do it." But it's very odd, or at least to me it's odd, and to many commentators it's odd, that the first resistance is only offered by Kalev, and Yehoshua seems to not be involved.
But Yehoshua is in the presence of his Rebbe,
Yeah,
and to speak in the presence of his Rebbe, to say something forceful, uh, perhaps that would have been something that would cross a line towards disrespect that Yehoshua didn't want to do. Whereas Kalev, little different, not this, not from not the same
I agree.
background, perhaps.
interesting.
He
I
opens
mean,
his mouth and he talks, he
okay.
speaks, he yells, he screams, he threatens.
Yeah, I hear the
Yeah.
suggest. I mean, there's definitely a more complicated relationship between Yehoshua and Moshe, or at least a relationship that we know of. Um, it's hard to imagine, though. I mean, Moshe is not doing anything to refute the spies, and um, it's. I
There's an
understand that we naturally assume that there's this awe that students have of their Rebbe. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's true, but it seems like that's paralyzing and not helping the situation here, right?
Is
there's an
Caleb?
analog here to possibly the situation with um, I'm sorry, with that Pinchas stands up when nobody else does,
Right.
and uh, where the leaders, uh, Moshe and Aaron, are both frozen
Mm-hmm.
in shock,
Right.
and uh, so that was potentially a massive disaster, uh, and this is a massive crisis.
Yeah.
Uh, so that Moshe and Aaron are tuned to this very much, and they're frozen, and
Right.
so their closest
So
followers,
so
closest to
so I hear what you're saying about Yeshua's mindset and maybe being a little bit reluctant. It there's other details of the story that make that a little bit hard to swallow necessarily, but there are definitely those who say that Yoshua was initially silent because he was Moshe's, we'll call him a Talmud Muvhak, his closest, or his disciple, closest student, and so everyone would expect him to say what Moshe wanted him to say. And so coming from Kalev, maybe it's more powerful. And so there are those who say that Yoshua sort of held himself back in order to give what he thought would be a more effective response. That allowing Kalev to be the speaker was perhaps Yoshua's attempt to make a more convincing appeal to the nation. That if it would come from Yoshua, that's expected, and he's just towing the party line. But Kalev maybe it's a little bit more surprising that he would go against the rest of the group. It's more interesting if we look at source number 4, which is the continuation of our parsha. So we have the interesting, I skipped over it, but Moshe gives the argument to, right? God says, I'm going to, I can't believe these people are again not listening to me, not obeying me. I'm going to destroy them. And so Moshe says, well, that wouldn't be helpful because then the rest of the world will say that you're not capable, right? That you just took them out of Egypt to kill them. And we have the famous line here, Vayomer Hashem salachti kidvarecha. God says, okay, Moshe, I forgive them according to your words, which we, of course, know from Slichos, from Yom Kippur davening. And it's interesting how this line gets sort of repurposed liturgically to be associated with the forgiveness for the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, whereas the original context is here in the story of the spies. But so Hashem says, okay, I won't destroy them. I won't totally wipe them out. Ulam chayani v'yimalei kvod Hashem ekol haaretz. However, I swear, as I live and as Hashem's presence fills the world, again, it's a little bit hard to translate. Ki chol anashim ro'im et kvodi v'et autotai asher asiti b'mitzrayim v'amidbar v'yinasu otui ze 10 pamim v'lo shamu b'koli. Right, my glory fills the world so much, and these people have seen it multiple times. They saw it in Egypt. They saw it in the desert. And they continue to test me time after time after time and not listening to my voice. So these people won't see the land. The Avdi Kalev, Ekev Haita Ruach Acheret Imo, V'Milei Acharai, Havioti V'La'aretz Asher Ba Shama V'Zaro Yorishena. But my servant Kalev, since he had a different disposition, and he followed after me, I will bring him to the land, and his children will inherit it. Okay, so again, we have the singling out of Kalev without Yehoshua. But Yehoshua has already done his part of resistance, right? We've already seen that he was with Kalev, tore his clothing, and said that we are capable if we believe in God. So why here is Kalev singled out again?
Suggests that Yehoshua's in a different category.
Okay, so maybe Yehoshua is in a different category. We'd have to understand what that category is. There are those who get a little bit technical with it, and this is just their way of trying to poorly answer a much stronger question. And one suggestion that's made is because the promise is made that Kalev's children will inherit the land, and there's a huge discussion as to whether Yehoshua had any children. And so one opinion says he had no children. One opinion says he had daughters but not sons. We know that the laws of inheritance with daughters was a bit more complicated. And so there are some who make that technical suggestion as to why only Kalev again is singled out, because the promise is he'll go to the land and their children will inherit it. Well, that's not true for Yehoshua. Even if he goes to the land, he might not have children to inherit the land. But Rashi picks up on a different element here. That is that Hashem says the reason why Kalev is going to go to the land and inherit it. And what's that reason that God gives?
Well, it says he's imbued with a different spirit.
Ekev haita ruach acheret imo. He's imbued with a different spirit. Rashi tells us what does this mean that he has a different spirit? Shtei ruchot, echad bapeh ve'echad balev. So Rashi says it means that he had really two different dispositions, one in his mouth and one in his heart. He told the spies, I'm with you. I'm going to give the same advice, or I'm in cahoots with you. I'll agree with your negative report. But in his heart, he was always determined to tell the truth. Al yedei chen haya bo koach lahashtikam. And that's how he was able to silence the spies and offer his more favorable reports. K'moshe ne'emar vayahas Kalev. As it says, we saw previously that Kalev silenced the people. Shayus furim sheyamar kimotam. They thought he was going to say exactly like them. Ve'oshen ne'emar b'sefer Yehoshua vayshevos hodavar kasher im livavi. So it brings a proof from Yehoshua that says, Kalev's they thought that they would say the same as themselves. It is that is I brought Moshe word against as it was in my heart. V'lo kasher impi, and not as I spoke to the spies. So he was sort of two-faced in his interaction. Vayimalei acharai, v'yimalei libo acharai, v'zeh mikra katzar. And he followed his heart after me, says God. So according to this, Kalev was able to be effective because he fooled the spies, right? And the implication might be that Yehoshua wasn't even willing to tell them that, to trick them to think that he was in agreement with them. Or maybe because, as Robert already mentioned, of his already established relationship with Moshe, that wasn't a possibility for Yehoshua. But for Kalev, it was a possibility, perhaps. And so his ruach acheret was his, according to Rashi, his ability to trick the spies into thinking he would agree with them, right? And as my former teacher Rabbi Yaakov Beasley says, you could sort of picture as each of the spies gives this negative report about, or this favorable report about the land. Now it's Kalev's turn. They're expecting him, and they're waiting to see what's he going to add to the negativity. What reason is he going to give that they won't be able to go and that they shouldn't go? And then he speaks his truth, and so it's more powerful because he already set up the expectation that he was going to be with the spies.
Oh,
Okay, so that's one understanding of the ruach acheret, of the different spirit that Kalev had, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So just to round out this first sort of meta question, in Sefer Devarim, when Moshe recaps the occurrence, the story to the next generation who's about to actually enter the land, we'll just go to the very end here of source number 7. Starting with verse 34, which is bolded. So God heard your response to the negative report of the spies, and he swore and he said, if one person of this generation will see the land which I swore to their ancestors, Zulati Kalev ben Yefune huyerena veloetin et haaretz asher diber ba ulevanav yan asher milei acharei Hashem, with the exception of Kalev ben Yefune. So again, only Kalev, not Yehoshua. So it's to me it's very, very, very strange. Why Kalev? There seems to be, we know that Kalev and Yehoshua are the two good guys in the story, and yet they seem to not be grouped together. They seem to be intentionally separated out. So now we need to go back to that other important piece of information that I alluded to, maybe is already known to some of us, and that is at the very beginning of the Parsha, back in source number 1, when all of the spies are named. So we read, L'matei Ephraim Hoshea bin Nun. From the tribe of Ephraim was Hoshea bin Nun. And then in verse number 16, Eila Shmot Anashim Asher Shalach Moshe Lator et Haaretz, Vayikra Moshe Hoshea bin Nun Yehoshua. These are the names of the people that Moshe sent to spy the land, and Moshe called Hoshea bin Nun Yehoshua. So there are those who say that this name change that Moshe gives to Yehoshua happened well before the incident of the spies, and we know that. We've already been introduced to the character of Yehoshua as Yehoshua, not as Hoshea, but as Yehoshua. And I'm forgetting who. I was learning over Shabbos in the Chabad in Panama, and I didn't have Svarim with me, so I forget which commentator it was, who says that we have other examples of this. When Yosef was taken to work for Paro, right, his name was also changed to Tzafna Paneach, that it was common when someone would take on a servant role, a disciple role, that there would be some name change associated with that status. So some say that Moshe's changing Yeshua's name happened well in advance, but a very often quoted Rashi tells us, "Vayikra Moshe laHoshea, hitpalel alav, Yah Yoshiatcha me'atzat miraglim." Moshe changed Joshua's name specifically now, before going on the mission with the spies, to say the name of God, Yud Hey, Yah, should save you from the counsel of the spies. Right? Here translated as the evil counsel of the spies. And so that Rashi always bothered me. If Moshe knows that they're going to give a bad report, why would he send them? But it doesn't necessarily have to be an evil report. It could just be, right? It may be like a blessing or a prayer that you should give an independent report on your own and not get caught up in whatever they're going to say, but don't get sucked into the groupthink. But that that it was a prayer and a bracha that Moshe gave him, that he should give an independent report, not influenced or tarnished by whatever the other people are going to say, whether Moshe knew or didn't know that it was going to be a negative report. So that's an important piece of information, and that might explain this singling out or differentiation we have between Yehoshua and Kalev. The first source I wanted to bring us back to is back number 8. Yaakov of Vienna, and the formatting here got a little bit messed up. I'm not sure why that. I think whatever. So he says, again, this is the question that we've been asking all along. Tema amai shibeach leKalev v'lo liYehoshua. This is commenting on the first time that Kalev is singled out. Why does God praise Kalev and not Yehoshua? Yesh lomar shemoshe hitpalel al Yehoshua, aval Kalev nitametz me'atzmo. So the answer that Rav Yaakov of Vienna gives is that Moshe already davened for Yehoshua, and Yehoshua already had the extra help of Moshe's prayer to allow him the fortitude and confidence to be able to give his accurate, true report that the land, in fact, is good and that he believes they're capable of conquering it. But Kalev didn't have such a bracha. Kalev's report was truly of his own, was truly remarkable in that sense, and so his standing up against the other 10 spies was even more remarkable, because he did it without the help of Moshe's tefillah, of Moshe's help, and however that prayer affected him. Again, whether you want to take it as sort of a metaphysical, that's what helped Yehoshua, or just that getting the prayer, getting the bracha from his Rebbe, gave him the fortitude, gave him the strength to be honest and to not go with the crowd on this. So that's one enticing suggestion. Any questions or thoughts on anything? I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I want to hear from you.
Yeah.
The Rebbe's suggestion is that because Kalev's, he calls it his resilience, was self-made.
Yeah.
It was his own efforts, and therefore when he spoke from a different position of strength.
Yeah.
His faith in Hashem had a stronger impact, and therefore he was able to silence the people. So it had made him stronger because he had done it himself. He had gone to do it and done it and really put it inside of himself. So it made him stronger.
Right. In there's a train of thought for this story in the Hasidic world, which sees Kalev as the paradigm of like a Baal Tshuva, and Yehoshua is the paradigm of what we would call an FFB, from birth. And so that we know, and we've spoken about how how much more powerful is the strength of tshuva. And so that might be also part of what is going on here. That's a beautiful way to tie it together. A second suggestion is made, and again, if I had more time this past week in front of the computer, maybe I would have found the original. But again, Rabbi Beasley summarizes an analysis of this story by Rav Yaakov Meidan, who's one of the Rosh Yeshiva currently serving at Gush. Rav Meidan suggests that Yehoshua and Kalev represent two paradigms of leaders. One type of leader has the strength and courage to speak the truth in all occasions, no matter the cost to personal reputation or popularity. The second type of leader is different. While he remains passionately committed to the truth, he's also sensitive to the effect that his words have on the people he leads. At times, silence is a preferred policy, as difficult as it may be to remain quiet. Behind the scenes, influencing and politicking may accomplish more good than dramatic declarations and chest thumping. This is Yehoshua, a person that the Torah describes as a man of spirit, of whom Chazal, okay. So the suggestion Rav Meidan makes is that we have on display here two types of leaders, and we could even say two types of leaders in crisis, right? That Kalev is a leader who in crisis, in all times, can only speak the truth. And no matter what else is going on around him, we know those people who don't necessarily have social savvy or social smarts to know when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate, but they will speak the truth no matter what. And he says that's the model that Kalev presents, whereas Yehoshua is more politically savvy. And we can agree or disagree as to whether how staying silent at this moment was appropriate and how that's politically effective. But we know ultimately Yehoshua was chosen to lead the next generation into the land. So clearly he, without getting into how, he clearly did establish himself as an effective leader. And so that's a suggestion that Rav Meidan makes. Which is quite interesting, and I wanted to then sort of trace this idea back and see if we can find a genesis for this political or leadership style in Yehoshua. And it's really interesting because hopefully you'll be able to stay with me. The first step I want to take is actually moving forward in Sefer Bamidbar to the very end, when Moshe finally realizes, despite all his efforts and all his pleading, well, there's more pleading in Sefer Devarim, but that he seems to come to terms with the fact that he's not going to be the one to lead the people into the land. And when he realizes that, he says in source number 11, Vaydaber Moshe el Hashem lemor, Moshe speaks to God, Yifkod Hashem Elokei haruchot l'chol basar ish aleda, may God, who is the, how does it translate it? The source of breath of all flesh, appoints a man over the nation. Asher yitzei lifneihem, asher yavo lifneihem, will go out in front of them and will come before them. Asher yotziem, asher yiviem, lo tiadat Hashem katzon asher ein lo ro'eh, and who will bring them out and bring them in. And the flock of God should not be like sheep without a shepherd. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, kach lecha et Yehoshua bin Nun, ish asher ruach bo v'samach yadcha alav. So God says, okay, take Joshua. He is a man who has ruach, who has spirit, and place your hands over him, and he's going to be the leader. And this is the first instance we have of smicha, literally of placing your hands upon the appointed leader to transfer that authority to the next generation. But the description both of Moshe in his desire for a leader and in God's choosing Yehoshua is ruach. Where do we see ruach before?
With Kalev.
With Kalev, right? Ekev asher yabo ruach acheret. So there's something about this ruach going on here, which is quite interesting. The Netziv says, we'll skip down number 13 and then we'll come back to 12. The Netziv says, Ish asher ruach bo, rucho hainu da'ato omeid bifnei atzmo, ve'eno nimshach achar netia ritzonit lehanat atzmo o acherim. So the Netziv understands ruach as being independent, that right, and maybe that resolute, that he is independent in his views, not drawn after urges for his own pleasures or that of others. And so we certainly understand the need for that in a leader, and we could even see how that might be the ruach, the spirit that Kalev had as well. Rashi says, "Asher ruach bo, kasher sha'alta," as you asked, "sheyuchal lahaloch keneged rucho shel kol echad ve'echad," that he is able to deal with the character of each person, right? That he's a leader who's able to relate to each individual in the community in their own way. So if Kalev was the model of someone who always speaks the truth no matter what, right? Kalev is going to be this is my way, this is the way it has to be. Yehoshua is someone who's able to offer nuance and someone who's able to contextualize things appropriately for each individual with whom he's interacting. This gets spelled out a bit more in the Medrash Tanchuma. It's a really interesting Medrash. It's actually the source, as you may be aware. There's a series of brachot that are recited not only upon seeing a beautiful natural phenomenon, but upon seeing different types of people, and we can get into whole secondary discussion as to whether this is a positive thing or a negative thing, right? That some of the traits that are recognized and that we're supposed to say a bracha over aren't necessarily seen as politically correct in our day and age, but certainly recognizing the differences that exist among people. So the Medrash says, I'm just going to pick up halfway through. You're welcome to look at the entire thing on your own. But the Medrash says, where is it in the English? Okay, if he sees crowds. If you see a crowd of people, you make the blessing before God of who is wise with secrets. Why is that the blessing? Just as their faces are unique and are not exactly the same, so too their disposition, their mindset, their thoughts are different. Each one has their own independent traits, disposition, thoughts, etc. And then if we just skip one line, Kol Bria Ubria, Yeshlo Dat Vifnei Atzmo. Every creature has their own independent thought and disposition. Tidal Shehu Kain. And how do we know that this is so, other than just being people living in the world? Moshe Mivakesh Min HaKadosh Baruch Hu Bishat Mitato, V'omer Lefanav Ribono Shel Olam, Galiv Yadua Lefanecha, Da'atam Shel Kol Echad Ve'echad, Ve'ein B'Shel Banecha Domeh Ze Lazeh. When Moshe was dying, the scene that we just saw in Sefer at the end of Sefer Bar Midbar, Moshe says to God, "It is known to you, God, that each person has their own dispositions, their own thoughts, and no one is identical to the other." Kishani mistalek mehen, v'akasha mimcha bikasha limanot alehem manhig maneh alehem adam sheyesover lechol echad ve'echad lefi da'ato. When I am no longer with them, when I die, when I depart, I ask you that if you will appoint a new leader over them, it should be a leader who's able to properly relate to the unique disposition and thought of each one of them. As it says, right, the God who recognizes the unique disposition of each person. And so Moshe, so it's really highlighting the ability to relate to each person on their own terms. And that might be the ruach that Yehoshua has. Another just interesting source that might support this idea is in the aftermath of the Korach rebellion, where God again wants to do one fell swoop punishment of the entire people. Right? Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe ve'Aaron lemor hibadlu mitoch ha'edah hazot v'achalei otam kerega. God tells Moshe and Aaron, separate yourselves from the people. I'm going to destroy them in one instant. Vayiplu al panehem vayomru El Elohei haruchot lechol basar ha'ish echad yechetev al kol edat yikzof. They call God El Elohei haruchot, God, the God of ruchot, of the spirits. If one person sins, are you going to get angry against the entire people, against the entire nation? So again, it's highlighting that ruchot is an indication of ability to differentiate and relate to people on individually on their own terms. And then, okay, so we know Yehoshua has this ruach. This is a unique trait that Yehoshua has. Kalev maybe has his own ruach, his own sort of ability to his own spirit ability to relate. But where does Yehoshua get this ruach from? How is Yehoshua blessed to be able to be called by God, Ish Asher Ruach Bo, a person who has this spirit? So I wanted to suggest that we see this in two earlier stories in Yehoshua's life. The first is in the aftermath of the Chet HaEgel, when Moshe was on the mountain and God tells him, look how horribly your people are acting. Moshe comes down from the mountain carrying the 2 tablets in his hands in source number 16. And we get this beautiful description of the Luchot. And then in verse number 17, Vayishma Yehoshua et kol ha'am bireo, Vayomer el Moshe, kol milchama b'machaneh. Yehoshua hears the voice of the nation in its evilness, in its wickedness, and he says to Moshe, kol milchama b'machaneh. There is the sound of war in the camp. Vayomer ein kol anot k'vura ve'ein kol anot chalusha, kol anot anochi shomea. Moshe says, no, you're wrong. It's not the sound of the tune of triumph or the sound of the tune of defeat. It is the sound of song, or just a sound, which I hear. Meaning what? Meaning Yehoshua, we already know, is the general. At this point in his life, Yehoshua can only see things through that paradigm of being a general. He hears that there's some outcry, that there's something not right, something amiss going on, something not right, and the only way he can think about it is through the prism, through the lens of, I'm a warrior, it must be that there's something related to war, to battle going on here. And Moshe says, no, you're wrong. There's other types of discontent. There's other types of sounds that might take place that aren't necessarily military based. And so that's the first lesson that Yehoshua gets. And the second lesson from last week's parsha is when Hashem appoints the Shivim Zakanim, the 70 elders who are going to help provide leadership or counsel or support for Moshe. We read after the Spirit of God is imbued on them, and these 2 people, Eldad and Medad, remain behind in the camp. Vayarat Hanar Vayagi Moshe Vayomar Eldad Medad Mitnabim B'Machaneh. So the Na'ar, the lad, who everyone understands as Yehoshua, or many understand as Yehoshua, or maybe it's someone different, right? But comes to Moshe. Some say it's Gershom, Moshe's son. He says Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Vayan Yoshua bin Nun Misharet Moshe Mibechurav Vayomer, and Yoshua bin Nun, Moshe's servant from his youth, says, Adoni Moshe Klaim, my master Moshe silenced them. Vayomer lo Moshe Mekane Atali, Mitin Kol Ha'am Hashem Nevi'im Kitin Hashem et Rucho Alehem. Moshe said to him, are you wrought up? Are you angry for me? Are you jealous for me? Are you zealous for me? Would that all of God's people were prophets, and that Hashem put the divine spirit, the Ruach, upon all of them. So again, Yehoshua is someone who earlier in his life, we don't know the time frame exactly, but at some earlier point, he seems to be in this one-size-fits-all, my way or the highway, or there's only one way of seeing things. And in these 2 crucial incidents, Moshe teaches him the need for greater perspective, a broader perspective, and greater context. And it might be that that's the Ruach, the spirit, which then Yehoshua is able to internalize that crucial message from Moshe to be able to realize that it's not always effective to be committed to one way and only one way of doing things and only one way of seeing things, but we need to be able to be more nuanced, and that might be what leads to Rav Meidan's really interesting suggestion that the reason we don't hear from Yehoshua in the same way that we hear from Kalev is because Yehoshua is more determined or more deliberate in his actions, more thought out, and more nuanced in his way of approaching this really horrible action of the people. So that was, the suggestion from Rav Meidan is a really interesting one. I didn't see, again, I wasn't able to locate his original essay on this, so I don't know if he makes a similar suggestion or if anyone tries to give the pre-story to that. But I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about things. And perhaps the greatest lesson might be that if this is accurate, that Yehoshua went through this growth process, so that might be the most telling characteristic, the most important characteristic of his leadership, is that he's someone who is open to critique and to learning and to changing and to growing as a result of the feedback that he got earlier in his life to become the great leader that he was. So that's my take on this story. Are there any questions, pushback, thoughts on any of this?
One thing that's striking to me is that I noticed the Rebbe emphasized it also, that Yehoshua studied the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know that about Kalev, but certainly anyone who is in our class by now should know that there are many different approaches to one pasuk.
Right.
That if a person is going to feel really strongly about a particular point of view, chances are they haven't looked enough at the other possibilities, and therefore they don't have the resilience and flexibility it takes to be a good leader, both in regard to what they think should be done and in regard to the person with whom they're studying. You know,
I
so
1000% agree with you, Anne. And I'll say back, but there have to be red lines, meaning, and like we need, right? Certainly a leader has to be able to, if
yeah,
something is blatantly false and wrong, we need our leaders to be able to call that out as well. And so it's as intriguing and as interesting as this suggestion is, and I hope there's a lot of truth to it. We also have to not get too caught up in that and remind ourselves that we also need to be able to, when there's a need for those red lines, to draw those red lines and know what they are as well, and to call
yeah,
those out.
that's what a Rebbe is for.
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
say. You know,
right.
yeah.
So anyway, it's a really interesting one. We always learn that Kalev and Yehoshua are the two good guys, and everyone else is the bad guy. And they acted correctly, and yet we don't see them acting together. They might both, right? They both tear their clothes together. That's the only time that we see them doing anything together as a group. And it's really interesting that the emphasis in the Torah's telling of it seems to be much more on Kalev and Kalev's reaction and calling out, and what we'll call it his courage. Whether it's courage or just doing the right thing, but that Kalev is certainly seems to get a lot more press and credit in the Torah's telling of it than Yehoshua does. And yet we know that Yehoshua became Yehoshua, and so he's also a good guy in the story. But like I always like to say, anytime we can find a new perspective and a new way of looking at these familiar stories is really interesting. And I think that there are some important leadership lessons and lessons for all of us to take to heart as well. So with that, I'm going to say Lila Tov.
That's Rabbi.
Yes,
Rabbi,
yes,
that suggests to me what I saw actually this morning on Baltimore Zionist District.
yeah,
It was Janusz Korczak, who was not quite a survivor because he joined about 200 children to their death. He could have been saved, but he went with the
Yeah.
children. Anyway, he was a fantastic educator. But the point that I'm getting to is that he taught people, and at the time, not many people actually thought that, but that children are like whole people and have all kinds of things just like you and me. And anybody should look at them, listen to them, whatever they say, and realize that that's part of the whole person. And he wrote many books and two, basically on that. I don't know. I was so
Yeah.
impressed.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. So it's great to see everyone on the screens, and I look forward to
You
being
and
back together.
great to be back.
I look forward to seeing everyone in person on Shabbos, hopefully, and have a great rest of the week.
Yeah. You too.
Lila Tov.
Thank you, Lila Tov.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Later.